Hi everyone and welcome to another edition of Backstory. I'm Dana Lewis. Russia attacked. It invaded Ukraine on the order of President Putin. Putin imagines neo-Nazis everywhere in Ukraine and stated his distorted view that this country of 44 million is not real. It belongs to Russia, he thinks, or so he says. The Nazi stuff is for Russians to rally support for his war. I don't even think Putin believes it, but maybe he does. It could be these last 2 years of being isolated in the pandemic has him not firing on all cylinders. He's definitely isolated and now an international pariah for his cruel war that he imagines would lead to a more powerful Russia. It won't. And unfortunately for the Russian people, he has left them a legacy of a collapsing economy and less security, not more. Putin is losing. His army is losing. It has not overwhelmed the big cities. The Russian army has been fought back in many places and seems to be running low on food and fuel and even certain kinds of ammunition. Morale is said to be in the ditch. On this backstory, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, former European Affairs Director for the U.S. National Security Council, U.S. Major General Mike Repass for more than 3 decades in U.S. Special Services, and he has trained the Ukrainian army. But first, you've seen the images of Kharkiv. That's the second largest city in Ukraine, of about 1.4 million people. It's been attacked by Russian forces this week. We talked to a resident there who says the Ukrainian army is holding the line and now counterattacking and will win this war. All right, Maria Avdeeva has been reporting often on social media from Ukraine, mostly, Maria, from Kharkiv?
Yes, exactly. I'm from Kharkiv. This is my hometown, and I have been staying in Kharkiv till yesterday evening. But then my house was without electricity for almost more than a day, and it looked out that there will be no electricity in the following days as well, meaning no heating and no possibility to cook anything and to boil water. So I decided to move to Dnipro, which is a nearby city. So it is quite close to Kharkiv, and then to be close to the city and have the possibility to come back as soon as there is such an option, and as soon as the city is will get to somehow normal life, because except that there is no electricity, there are shortages of food supplies. The last time I was able to get something from the supermarket was before the war, so it's already have been for 10 days ago. Now,
how are people eating in Kharkiv? I mean, many of them then have had to leave because of food shortages?
Yes, well, so some people had already, some resorts did that because it was obvious that something is going to happen, and we had this information about that Putin is preparing to start war. And so people were getting something and making reserves at home, not me, unfortunately. So I was always, and hadn't find time for that. But then now there are some humanitarian supplies of.
You said that you're in Dnipro, so you were able to actually leave Kharkiv, because everybody seems to feel that Kharkiv is surrounded. It's obviously not.
Well, so the Kharkiv is not surrounded completely. Russian troops are on the north part of Kharkiv and then on the eastern part. So it is still possible to live in the southern direction, but there are constant shellings and bombings, and you should understand that when you are in the car, you are easy target for such bombardments and shellings. So you can be hit it while you are driving in the car, because there is no green corridor or anything of that sort. So everyone who is taking a car apparently takes the risk of being a target of the attack from the air. And many people try to live by the railway. and I did it as the same, taking the train. So there are still evacuation trains from Kharkiv, and people try to get in because it is very difficult and it is very crowded. You cannot get tickets. It's just on the base who came first and who was able to get into the train. Dnipro is not popular destination because it is very close, and people mostly try to get to the western Ukraine, to Lviv and that part of the country. So to Dnipro, it is still possible to get by train because like people would prefer to move further and not to the nearby city.
Tell me what you've seen and experienced in Kharkiv, because it has been one of the areas very hit very hard by cruise missiles, by bombing and shelling, and the pictures have been horrendous from there, some of them.
Yes, it was exactly as you say. So the war started 10 days ago, and at first it was challenged by Grad rocket systems. And that was when the first wave of people wanted to leave the city, because at that moment everything stopped. The city became frozen because people didn't know what to do and how to act. Then when it was already, so we've got more and more information about what is happening, and then these talks with Russia began, and somehow there was more understanding of what it is going on, and people were ready to resist and fight. And we have a very great territorial defense units doing amazing job in fighting back Russian troops, because actually what Russia did, so Kharkiv is 40 kilometers from the borders with Russia, and Russian troops tried to get into the city in the first days, and they were stopped by Ukrainian military on the outskirts of Kharkiv. So they didn't manage to actually get inside the city. And Ukrainian military were and still are holding and even counter-attacking Russian troops there right now at the moment. And when Russia saw that they cannot enter the city and all the attempts were fought back, and they didn't expect to see so much resistance from Ukrainian side. And so they now decide to use these tactics of terrorizing the city and hitting residential areas to create chaos inside the city, because it is 1.5 million city, the second largest city in Ukraine, and under constant shelling and bombings, people will try and are already trying to leave the city, which makes it harder for the military, to cope with everything, because they have the Russian troops and also have to somehow cope with the situation inside. They try.
So you're saying it's better for the Russian military to have civilians going out at this point, because it leaves them able to concentrate just on fighting and rather than humanitarian?
For the Russian troops, you mean? What was you asking?
You're saying that for the Ukrainian army, better to have civilians leave so that they don't have to worry about looking after people. They just focus on fighting the Russian troops. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it is hard to say so. I would say that it is what Russia is focusing at, terrorizing the civilians, so that create more problems for Ukrainian army. Because for Ukrainian army, the best situation would be when the living inside the city is as normal as it could be in their circumstances, and that the constant bombardments will stop, because this causes the situation when they need to also to cope with the situation inside Kharkiv. And that's also for territorial defense, for example, because we have many territorial defense units, and now if the situation would be normal, they will be concentrating only on Russians, but now they also have to help cope with this humanitarian crisis, help people to leave the city, and to control everything. And the more times goes by, the crisis develops, and then it means that they will need more of that, because apparently at some point the humanitarian aid will come in, and then there will be need in people who will take care about that, and also keep the city under control. So it all okay.
Tell me what you experience in the city. I mean, are these rocket and cruise missile attacks and bombings coming close to you? Do you actually feel them? And where do people sleep at night? Are they staying in apartments, or are they underground?
Well, I live in Kharkiv. My house is close to the city center. So Russia started to bombard the city center 3 days ago. And that's why I was feeling and seeing that, because I was staying inside. It depends on the people and where do they live. So, for example, my house, it is made from the bricks. And the walls are pretty thick, and I had seen the instruction saying that in that case it is advisable to stay in the corridor, so you would have 2 thick walls between you and the street, and then if the attack happens, then you will probably inside will not be hit by that. Because, for example, if you go to the basement and something falls down and blocks the exit from the basement, then you will be blocked, under the building. And also other people are finding place and hiding in the underground, because it is used as a shelter, and people sleep there, especially with small children. But of course, well, living in such conditions, all the time hiding in the underground, or I don't know, probably in some shelters, it is only temporarily. It is very hard to live in this situation for like a long time, because there are no possibility there to prepare food and just take care of anything. So it's just like, for some time you could do that, but then for a longer period of time you would think about trying some place where to go. So, and Russia is counting on that. They continue bombing the city, because it makes more and more difficult to live in this situation. And from my friends, so some of them still are in Kharkiv. Mostly it's those who do not have children, because it's easier to take care about yourself when you do not have anyone dependent on you. And then others left at the beginning, trying to bring children to the safer places. And some of them are now, thinking about the possibility to leave, because it is becoming more and more difficult.
It's unimaginable what people are living through right now in Ukraine. Inside Russia, people are not getting a lot of news, and President Putin is telling them it's a denazification, that he's protecting Russia from a Ukraine that wants to somehow attack in NATO. What would you say to Russians, and what would you say to President Putin?
We are trying actually to hear by the Ukrainian civil community to bring this world to Russian people, because you're completely right. There is military censorship in Russia, and now Facebook and Twitter are banned there. And they have adopted the law saying it is forbidden to say that the Russian war in Ukraine is something that should be opposed. So the only option for you is to stay on this side and approve that. So Putin was always suppressing civil society, and it was always nothing left there. But now the situation is unimaginable, and we try to share the information about what is happening, especially about what Russian troops see here, because they were told by Putin and his commanders that they will see here no fighting, that it will be probably for them an easy task because Ukrainians are waiting to be denazified. And when they come here and see that it's all complete lies and people here just wanted to live free and be independent, and they don't want any Russians here, and all these young conscripts, when they come to Ukraine and when they face the real fight, they put down their weapons because they do not have any mission, any idea of what actually are they doing in Ukraine. And that is why it is really important to bring this message to Russia and tell Russian people that we are not waiting for them here. And everyone who comes to Ukraine with weapons will be killed or will be taken as captives. So Ukrainians are fighting not with Russia. We are fighting for our own land. We never threatened Russia with anything. We just wanted to be free, to be part of the free democratic world. That was only, the only wish, and is the only wish is of Ukrainian people. And the more Ukrainian children are killed by Russian bombs, the more anger I see in the eyes of Ukrainian warriors. They want, to fight back, and they want revenge because our children were never, they never did anything wrong, and now they have to live through this war experience with no reason. The only reason is that Putin hates Ukraine and everything Ukrainian. And I actually hope that I don't hope that there will be mass protests in Russia because Putin was suppressing everything there. But then probably there will be some groups in Russia, in the closest Putin circle, that probably could, manage somehow to influence him, or I don't know, physically do something, because, that is the only option now. And we try to also to target and to give message to the Russians who have their children studying in United States, in Britain, who have their houses, who want to go there to spend vacations, and who have bank accounts in Switzerland and other international banks. So the message to them is very clear: if you do not stop the Putin, this will be over for you. So it's not only about the sanctions generally on Russia; it's about the sanctions for every such personality, because that will mean that each such person will have no ability anymore to live the lives they used to live. And probably my hope is that it will create this group of pressure that will actually push on Putin, and will probably lead to some kind of ceasefire or stop this war.
Well, I think that's everybody's hope. Maria, can you see, when you look in the fighters' eyes, so you obviously talk to people who are there defending Kharkiv, what is their morale and what is their capability? Just do you believe, because there's a lot of different stories about will the Ukrainian army hold the line, or over time will Russia win this fight, or do you think over time it will play to the favor of the Ukrainian army and that they will be able to push Russia back? I mean, how do you see it now?
Yes, I have been to the place where Ukrainian territorial defense units eliminated Russian military vehicles that tried to get to the city center, and over there was still this territorial defense, people from territorial defense that just completed the fight, and we were speaking to them, and the morale is really high, and it is getting higher. And we here understand that Russia is losing its resources because they actually planned to get control over over Ukrainian large cities quick, because Putin probably was planning it's a kind of blitzkrieg, and it didn't turn out the way he planned that. And that means that the morale of Russian soldiers is falling down. They are not, they do not have any resources to move further. And our soldiers see that, and the reports I have now from them and from territorial defense is they now feel that the moment when they will be pushing them out of the territory of Ukraine is close. So they're ready to go and there and to attack and counter-attack, so to move Russian forces completely out from the Ukrainian territory, because the Russians do not have, for example, even fuel supplies. They do not have normal supplies, food supplies as well, medical supplies, because they are in the country, on Ukrainian territory, isolated from the main Russian troops, or like the main Russian territory. And now the only option they have is this constant bombarding and the shelling, but then our artillery fights back. And what we need now, and what Ukraine is really looking for, is either it will be a no-fly zone above Ukraine, or it will be a help with, for example, fighter jets, or probably international volunteers, because now President Zelensky has announced that international military, for example, veterans could come and participate here on Ukrainian side, and we use these fighter jets in this to protect Ukrainian sky. So if it all happens and it all works together, then I think it is completely so Ukraine will be able for sure to get the control over what territories that were left, so that Russia now controls, and then actually push forward and win this war.
Maria, I'm glad you're okay, and I'm glad you're in good spirits, and please stay safe and stay lucky.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I will try to do my best and try to share as much as possible to the world. And thank you for your support. We feel here the support of all countries of the free world, and all these messages coming to Ukraine are so important. And I always try to communicate to Ukrainians, and this unity of the whole world that gives also the more and more strength to Ukrainian people, because they feel they are not alone, and they are together with everyone in the world, and that gives us the strength and the willingness to fight and to resist. Thank you.
All right, Alexander Vindman is a retired United States Lieutenant Colonel who was the Director for European Affairs for the U.S. National Security Council. He testified before the United States Congress regarding the Trump-Ukraine scandal. His testimony provided evidence that resulted in the charge of abuse of power in the impeachment before Donald Trump. And I've had the pleasure of talking to him before, and he joins us now. Hi, Alex, how you doing?
I'm doing well, but that introduction puts a little context on what's going on now, doesn't it? Because that was the whole thing in the first impeachment was about Ukraine.
If Trump had not tried to leverage Ukraine for political gain, but had actually been serious about arming Ukraine and understanding the threat that was gathering on its border, do you think Ukraine would be in a much better position right now?
I think it would be. I mean, that's a huge if. I mean, the premise is that Trump would set aside his cheerleading for and deep kind of affection for Putin in favor of Ukraine. If he had set that aside and supported Ukraine, and really didn't cause harm for not just the fact that he didn't provide the this meeting that Zelensky needed, that the arms that were kind of frozen for some months, but hadn't harmed about 2.5 years of a relationship, because Ukraine became radioactive as a result of the Ukraine scandal. If that didn't happen, yes, Ukraine would have been in a much better position.
Interesting. And then, yeah, and you know, because a lot of Republicans right now in the U.S., I understand, are sitting around going, well, if President Trump was the commander in chief right now, Putin wouldn't dare to have done this, which sounds ludicrous.
It's absurd, but it's actually, the way I'd put it is, there's actually been about 20 years of not particularly thoughtful foreign policy with regards to Russia. Putin is the kind of guy that, you know, he'll take as much as he can get, and he'll double down in the face of lack of resolve. So when he conducted his operations that resulted in the Orange Revolution, when he tried to kind of orchestrate his candidate in 2004 in Ukraine, there was not a serious response. When he attacked Georgia, there was not a serious response in response to the 2014 war. Not much. To Syria, not much. To interference in U.S. elections, not much of a response. To poisoning, using chemical weapons on a NATO territory to attempt to assassinate an opposition leader, not much. You know, the assassinations. This is the pattern where he felt like he was emboldened because there was a lack of resolve. And if that was the case for 20 years, that was the pattern under George W. Bush and President Obama, under this failed or false prospect of, this is where we should be applying our resources, a place that we're not going to make some headway, as opposed to Ukraine, where we have a willing partner, misapplication of resources there. That was a creep. That was a creep towards a bad outcome. I'm just saying, during Trump, it wasn't a creep; it was a lurch. So the premise that it wouldn't have occurred is just a false premise that it wouldn't have occurred under Putin, under Trump, because what we had is a failed policy that lurched towards kind of disaster under Trump, that brought us closer to a confrontation, inevitably, because Putin perceived weakness, he perceived divisiveness, and he perceived opportunity.
I was in Ukraine when you mentioned that his candidate, who was Yanukovych, who later on became the president, but during the Orange Revolution, that was overturned, and Yushchenko became the president. And then, but Russia openly campaigned for Yanukovych, and in fact, Putin came to Ukraine. He was in Ukraine campaigning for one of the candidates. So there was already this tug of war that was going on between Russia attempting to hijack the elections there, and the struggle within Ukraine for a real democracy. I mean, this just didn't happen, you know, with Maidan in 2014.
Well, that's exactly right. And that was a major inflection point. That's where the Russians kind of started to develop their rhetoric around the West and color revolutions, this false premise that we were interfering in the countries in Russia's periphery, which is exactly what Russia was doing, and they were mirror imaging.
But they really believe, Alexander, that the U.S. and, you know, its Western allies were deeply involved in then organizing the demonstrations that were taking place in central Kiev and then also in Maidan. Is there any truth to their claims that this was Western orchestrated?
No, not only is there no truth, but I mean, part of this is mirror imaging. They know what they do, and they believe that other countries play by the same rules. So there's no truth. I mean, especially like, yes, people could point to kind of Toria Nuland in 2000 in the Revolution of Dignity, walking around and kind of passing out bread. But that is kind of a soft show of support for people, for protesters that are trying to, you know, pick their way democratically to a future, to a prosperous future, as opposed to the deep, multifaceted, layered approach that Russia takes to conduct its offensive, its hybrid warfare operations and things of that nature. So it's just not, it's a false comparison to equate the two.
Do you since we mentioned Yanukovych now, who was chased out of Ukraine after he fired on protesters on the Maidan Square, and is being sheltered in Russia, do you believe any of this talk that Putin wants to reinstall him as the president, which, you know, nobody in Kiev or nobody in Ukraine would follow this guy? But do you believe any of that?
I think that was that was Plan A. Plan A was based on this notion that the Russian forces would roll in unopposed, encircle cities, remove the political leadership of Ukraine, and then install a puppet government. But clearly, Plan A was fatally flawed, literally fatally flawed for thousands and thousands of Russian troops. Because when the Russians approached these cities, they extended their lines of communication. They didn't have the means to secure those fuel, food, and ammunition trucks coming in behind them, as the Ukrainians were punishing the Russian forces outside of these cities and destroying large formations. So that was Plan A. Plan A is completely out the window. There's no way to do this without occupying Ukraine for long term and in the face of major Ukrainian resistance. Putin's political objectives, are untenable. He cannot reach his objectives of a quick lightning operation and then withdrawal without with the idea, again, a false premise that there wouldn't be a backlash from the West. Now he's on to, frankly, Plan C, which is bomb the hell out of him and see if he could punish the Ukrainians into some sort of capitulation or a diplomatic victory that he can't achieve through military arms. I think the fact is he's running out of the ground combat power to achieve his military objectives. And he's not even gone into the cities, and the cities eat armies.
Why do you think he's running out of the ground combat? I mean, people have said, for instance, that they're running out of cruise missiles. I don't know how true that is.
That's right. The magazine of Russian cruise missiles is not deep. Ballistic missiles, on the other hand, is deep. So these are the 5 brigades that are encircling Ukraine, and these have a pretty significant range. They could range large portions of Ukraine. They can't get all the way to Western Ukraine. But he has also a large amount of planes, and he has a large amount of helicopters. That's probably the biggest mismatch. It's these long-range fires that Russia has that Ukraine doesn't compare with. But on the ground, the Ukrainians have punished the Russian armed forces, the ground forces. They've destroyed lots and lots of vehicles, hundreds of vehicles, and they've killed, by Ukrainian estimates, some 10,000 troops. That is a devastating loss. When you think about, in the course of the Soviet Union's war in Afghanistan, a 10-year war, they suffered 15,000 casualties, and the Soviet Union is twice as large as Russia is. That is a punishing campaign, and I think the bottom line is that the Russian army is large, and the big scheme of things, 10,000 is not that much. But the equipment that's being lost is not easily replaced. It's not the tanks and the armored vehicles, where there is a lot of them. It's the it's the communications stations. It's the engineer vehicles. It's the air defense capabilities. These are the things that are perishable, and Russia just can't replace them in significant numbers. That's why they're using conscripts instead of contract forces now.
You think the Kremlin is shuddering right now? I mean, President Putin said in his latest address, when he was handing out money to the families of some of those soldiers, he said everything is going according to plan. Yeah. And they admitted now that they have, as we do this interview after a week of the attack, the invasion of Ukraine, they're admitting to 500 soldiers being killed, which nobody expected them quite to come clean on, quite frankly. Yeah. So it may be, as you say, 10 or 20 times that. Do you think that Putin understands that this is not sustainable and will play very badly with the Russian public? I mean, if they get hold of the real numbers here.
Not yet. I think he believes he's has all the tools, the repressive tools, to control the narrative. He's still he's really like feeding troops in like cannon fodder into Ukraine with the hope that he could still achieve some military objectives, encircle the cities. But he can't do this. He can't do this for months. At least not with ground forces. He could continue to rain fire down on cities, but he can't do this with ground forces.
So what does he need for a victory? What does he need for a victory? Kiev, and remove the leadership and put President Zelensky behind bars? I mean, what is going to stop Putin, and what is he going to withdraw with?
I think I could. I don't know what's going to. I could tell him. I could tell you what the end state is shaping up to look like. It's shaping up to look like he's destroyed large portions of the cities, and he withdraws and claims a moral victory, saying that he's demilitarized and denazified, even though that's not happened. That's probably where he goes to. But this could play out over the course of weeks and months. And if it plays out over the course of weeks and months, and he's taking those kinds of losses, and it's the Russian military that's being demilitarized based on how much the ground forces are being shoot up, I think there's a propensity for him to behave more erratically, to use more repressive tools against the Russian population. That's going to shift from political protest against the war to socioeconomic protests, just for the necessities of life. And he doesn't have the security forces there because they're not getting paid. He becomes more erratic and lashes out. And there is a legitimate prospect of this spilling over as he lashes out into kind of a broader conflict with NATO. That's why this needs to end more quickly. That's why, we will take these the Republican Party that has blood on their hands and has been complicit in precipitating this war, because they were feeding this narrative that the Republican Party would not take a firm stand against Russia, or that the Republican Party was cheerleading for him. Because we need the Republican Party to join with the Democratic Party to vote in more support for Ukraine, to vote in greater sanctions. And we need to be able to provide Ukraine with a form of lend-lease, this idea that anything that they ask for, they get. It's not just-in-time anti-armor. It's not just-in-time air defense. We just feed the stuff in and let the Ukrainians have as much of it as they can to bring this to a quicker halt, because the longer this goes, the more dangerous it gets. And we also introduce unmanned combat aerial vehicles. That is going to be essential. That is going to be a big equalizer there to Russian air power, because unmanned combat aerial vehicles could strike targets, the 30, 50, 80 kilometers inside Russian territory, those air bases with all those fighter planes, those ballistic missile launchers that are operating from Russian territory. And without those, not only does he not have the ground combat power to achieve his objectives, to go inside the cities, he may even encircle them, but going inside the cities is a whole different prospect. But he doesn't have the fires to punish the Ukrainian population and inflict civilian casualties. So we need to rush those there now. That's going to be.
Are we doing that? Is there time?
There is time, because the Ukrainians provided us time. Their fierce resistance has provided a hope that Ukraine actually exits this conflict, with a human disaster, but with its sovereignty and its independence intact. And at this point, the fact is that his biggest successes are actually in the south, advancing along the south, but he still has some major hurdles, like the city of Mariupol.
And by the way, you would expect that he would do well in the south, because they held Crimea, so they could push armor up that had been already gathering in Crimea into those areas and take Kherson and then push out and
morale was better.
Mariupol is a mess. I mean, people are saying that he's probably destroyed a quarter of the city of 450,000.
Yep. Well, it's you're right. So there was a couple of advantages that attacking from the south had. One is that the morale of the troops there was much better. They weren't sitting out in field conditions for months. The weather is better, so he could maneuver a little bit better. But even there, he's facing fierce resistance. Kherson is a big city, but it's not a major city. It's been described as a major city. It's not. It's a medium-sized city in a country with a population of before the war of about 45 million.
So you see the Ukrainians holding on, the Russian army surrounding and laying siege to these cities, but unable to enter and take some of the big areas of resistance, like Kharkiv, like Kiev. And then you see what? The Ukrainians getting stronger now as time goes on, not weaker.
That's exactly right. Especially with safe havens in Western Ukraine, where supplies are coming in. And the javelins and the air defense systems are going to continue to slowly whittle away at Russia's air superiority. Russia has a massive air superiority, by the way. But Ukraine's air force is still intact. Ukraine is still having effects from air power, including both on ground targets and against Russian air power. And Ukraine's air defense capabilities are still intact. So they're slowly whittling down on Russia's superiority there. The biggest game changer, the biggest thing that we need to provide, and it's not actually risky, it's risk informed, meaning that we're thoughtful of how we do this, is providing these UCAVs, these unmanned combat aerial vehicles. And this is not new ground. The Turks, with their Bayraktars, its TB2s, have been pretty effective. And all we're doing is we're feeding more of the same kinds of capability into Ukraine so they could level the playing field.
When will they arrive?
We haven't made a decision about that. This is something that I've been pressing on for some time with great resistance from folks that think this is too escalatory, but it's not. What's escalatory is letting this war play out over the course of weeks and months, and then having Russia, bomb nuclear power stations that force us to eat our words about troops on the ground, or that force us to eat our words about, not a no-fly zone. As the longer this goes, the more unpredictable it gets. So, doing things that are, incrementally tiny, slightly more risky now is better than the options we're going to have if this plays out over a longer period of time.
Who do you think has Putin's ear? Is he? People tell me that he is isolated. He's become more isolated during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Do you think that he is making decisions alone, or is it just that very tight core of his frightened inner circle, like Patrushev and others? I mean, do you want to take a run at that? I mean, is this?
Yeah. I mean, it's I'm not reading the intel, but based on my study, pretty long study of how he operates and how his government operates, I do think it's very, very insular, and that the folks that would have had access to him in the past, like the technocrats, don't make it in there. So those are the folks that are counseling on, except if they have to, kind of for a dog and pony show. These are the folks that would warn about the catastrophic damage of sanctions and Russia being isolated. Those folks are not making it in there. It's his inner circle of like Siloviki, the power structures that are talking to him and probably not providing the best information. These are the people that kind of fed him the information that allowed him to judge that Ukraine would roll over and that he should provide guidance for a battle plan that was unrealistic, this Blitzkrieg battle plan. You could see the pieces kind of logically falling together and facts on the ground that support this notion. So it's not just completely speculative. So I don't think he's getting particularly good information, but eventually he's going to get to the point where he's going to say, send in my second army, guards army, and you get Shoigu and Gerasimov saying that army doesn't exist, Mr. President, or send in my most powerful first guards tank army, which is in fact that exists, but it doesn't exist anymore because it's gotten chewed up. I mean, it's still portions of it exist, significant portions of it exist, but it's not the same guards army that we could have talked about 10 days ago. These are the lead echelons. These are the most powerful formations that Russia has that are getting chewed up. The airborne forces are getting chewed up. So he's going to start feeding in more conscripts, more reserve forces that are going to perform less better than his elite fighting formations. It sounds crazy, but he's demilitarizing the Ukrainian. I mean, yes, he's demilitarizing the Ukrainian army to a certain extent, but the Ukrainian population's behind the army. He's demilitarizing the Russian army.
What would you say about the psychological state of the Kremlin and Putin?
I'd say that he's going to be like a caged animal and increasingly erratic. Right now, there's still an opportunity to reformat his thinking, that he doesn't succumb to kind of the incrementalism and the double down mentality that he's had historically, because that's he's kind of fed on impunity, the lack of consequence, and incrementalism here, where he keeps feeding in more forces, he keeps getting the information that somehow it's the West that's on the ground fighting him. the longer it goes on, the more dangerous it gets. But if we could tip the situation in Ukraine's favor in the next week or two, and it really devastates the remainder of the ground forces, really devastates the air forces, the ballistic missile forces, he could be reformatted into making this claim. He's a tyrant. He could make the claim that I've been successful. Time to go back home. Thanks, Russian army. You performed brilliantly. And then deal with the consequences of a restless military. He could do that. But the longer it goes, the more unrest there is, the more erratic I think his decision making is likely to become. And that's why it's so important for the U.S. military and the U.S. government to assume a modicum of risk, recognizing that the risk is going to be higher the longer this goes.
I guess the problem is that he's never going to withdraw fully. So maybe he withdraws from cities, but maybe he holds part of the Black Sea coast, or maybe he holds that land bridge to Crimea. And so
yeah,
I just
think
don't
that's a
see an
possibility.
end to this. I don't see a way to get Putin to step back, step down to a point that Ukraine would ever accept it.
Yeah, well, see, what I think is I've thought about this idea of him retaining a land bridge. The problem is that he'd be subjecting his forces to massive attacks constantly. And the best case scenario, really the best case scenario for him might be to return to some sort of status quo ante, where he has a Crimea, he fortifies Crimea. He may even lose LNR and DNR. It's possible he may end up being in that position because now that, you could see that
this is the contested Donbass area.
Donbass area, and he settles for Ukraine, for Crimea, but that's we're within the next week or so. We're kind of at a tipping point that he's just not going to have the forces, the military forces, to achieve his political objectives anymore.
Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, really a pleasure to talk to you, and always a treat to get your views and well-informed views. Thank you so much.
До встречи. Thank you.
All right, Major General Mike Repass, retired, is somebody who served in special forces for 33 years in the U.S. Army, and he was directly involved in advising Ukrainian forces since 2016, and he's a board member of the SOF Foundation. Hi, Mike.
Hey, how you doing? It's nice to be here.
Sir, you've spent time with that army in Ukraine. Can you tell me what do you think they're experiencing right now? I mean, they are under heavy bombardment, everything from cluster bombs to fuel air bombs to artillery and some air attacks. They seem concentrated in the cities. Do you think that they're able to move? Are they able to strike back?
Yeah, so all good questions. Let's kind of assess where we're at and what's going on.
Sure.
So I agree that they've surrounded the cities. That's been a deliberate strategy, and it's to fix whatever forces that are defending those cities in place. So in the north, you've got Kharkiv. It's been surrounded. It's under direct assault, both on the ground and from indirect fire. It appears that they've run out of precision munitions, with the exception of the Iskander missiles. So the Iskanders are precise, but they don't pack quite the punch that the other family of missiles they've been using have been, in destructive power.
Although I think there was a cruise missile strike yesterday.
Yeah, and I'm giving you, moving forward from yesterday, I think they're out of most of their long-range precision air-launched or ground-launched missiles. So that was predicted by a guy named General Rio Terras, who's now a member of the European Parliament out of Estonia. He figured they would run out probably about today or tomorrow of long-range strike munitions. The good news is they're out of long-range strike munitions. The bad news is they're going to resort to blunt force trauma induced by tube artillery, rocket artillery. And that will bring about the destruction of the cities. They're going to do that. The history of the Russian army is they will inflict casualties on the enemy and the civilian population by encircling and then systematically rubbling the cities. That has a couple of effects. One, it eliminates the potential for significant resistance. Two, it creates a massive refugee population or problem set that the government and the regional nations have to deal with as well. So we should see more of what's going on in Kharkiv, down in certainly Mariupol on the Sea of Azov on the right-hand side. It's encircled now. I've heard that Kherson has fallen. The reports out of Ukraine vary with that. They may have captured the city government and the city center, but they haven't captured all of Kherson, which gets into a larger issue with the Russian military that we can discuss.
Here's what I think.
Yeah.
If you will allow me, if there was one area that would fall quickly, it would be Kherson, because maybe it's a success for the Russian army, but let's face it, they had Crimea. They have been able to land, amphibious landings around that area. So one would think that they could at least take Kherson. It doesn't mean that they're making tremendous progress 8 days into this.
I accept your point. I don't contest that. You would think that if they're going to have success, it should be down there. They are somewhat constrained by the two bridges that lead up out of Crimea into Kherson Oblast. One of those bridges was blown and another has been heavily contested, but they seem to be in control of it now. But here's the thing, Dana. I think Russia's going to be the dog that caught the car. And they may be able to grab a hold of certain parts of Ukraine, but holding on to it, they can get the cities, they can surround the cities, they can do whatever, but they will not be able to control the terrain that they occupy for an indefinite period of time. But certainly with the number of troops they have, somewhere between 150 and 170,000 troops, that's insufficient to establish a long-term occupation and suppress the people. So while they nominally have forces in Kherson and have taken over the city center, potentially, their ability to sustain that control over an indefinite period of time, certainly enough to subdue the population, is highly doubtful, in my opinion.
So how do you...
I would like to hear your opinion on that, by the way.
I mean, the occupation is a dramatic event that you then have to either win over the population or you are going to be fought endlessly. And everything I've heard is that they probably need, from military experts like yourself, 150 or 200,000 troops isn't going to do it. You probably need 700,000 troops in there to be able to control Ukraine long term if you're going to occupy it all. Yeah.
So I agree with you. 700,000 would basically consume the Russian army. They would have to call up reserves and bring in, all kinds of paramilitary and so forth.
So do you see, just picking up on that, if they don't occupy it all, do you see them that the Ukrainian army may lose some ground and lose some cities, but they will regroup and keep fighting on, and that they will come back and try to retake those cities? Or do you see that more as kind of a resistance fight after that?
Yeah. Okay. I yes and yes. Let me backtrack just a little bit and let's talk about the Russians just a little bit. Leading up to this, first off, I was among the people that didn't believe that Putin would attack. Intelligence saying he was going to attack, I absolutely didn't believe it because I didn't think he was that big of a risk taker. He is, taking Crimea, taking Donbass, going into the northern part of Georgia, South Ossetia, and so forth. Those were all easy takes for him. Ukraine was not going to be an easy take, and I didn't think that he would be up for a big bloody battle, which is what he has on his hands. So, but I think there were a few things that he needed. There's one thing that he must have. He must have control of the North Crimea Canal. Following the 2014 invasion of Crimea, the Ukrainians cut off the North Crimea Canal where the Dnipro River feeds it fresh water that runs 100 and some kilometers down to Crimea and provides fresh water to the peninsula. Since 2014, they've been relying on either groundwater or water that's been trucked in from Russia or railroaded in from Russia across the Kerch Bridge. Now, that's the one thing he must have.
Right. He's got that because they've reopened. This is obviously a lot more about just water.
Right.
So do you think he aims to take all of that coast, Mariupol, where the fighting is? I mean, is endlessly shelling into the city. I mean, they are destroying large parts of that city. Kherson he's got. Then he starts moving towards Odessa. Maybe involves Transnistria and in Moldova. What do you want to see in your crystal ball there?
Yeah. So my prediction pre-conflict was he wasn't going to attack, and if he does attack, he'll take the North Crimea Canal. He got that 4 days ago. Water should be reaching Crimea now. He will expand out from Donbas and northward from Crimea and secure a land bridge to Crimea, and to ensure that the viability of those two things, that one he must have, the other he wanted to have, to ensure the viability of that, he needed to secure the east side of the Dnipro River up to and around up to Kiev, and then arching around to Donbas over there, which would skirt under Kharkiv, if you will. So that's the mission essential, critical, must-have stuff that one he must have, the other he wants to have.
All right, I want to let you continue. Can Putin take half a country and hold it? Because if you have the other half, Western Ukraine, presumably Ukrainians will fight on and will try to reclaim the eastern part of the country. So is this the war that sucks him in further and further? Because if he's going to get hit from the west, he's going to at a certain point say, you know what, we're going to have to go all the way to Lviv and claim all of it. Yeah.
So that gets into this this other part of the problem set here. I think anything west of the Dnipro will eventually be bargaining chips for a settlement, a peace, with the exception of what you mentioned earlier, expanding out from Kherson, going over to Odessa, and then we can in a moment we can talk about Transnistria and Moldova. But I think all that will be a bargaining chip. Is probably nice for him to cut off the Black Sea from Ukraine, or Ukraine from the Black Sea. But he doesn't have to have that. He wants to have that. But I can see him bargaining that away in a future peace settlement that assures that he has the land bridge and access to fresh water.
Do you agree with assessments that this just didn't go well for them and they are probably recalculating?
It is suboptimal what they have achieved so far. What they wanted a quick and decisive, not bloodless but less bloody campaign that decapitated the nation. They obviously didn't have that, but it's apparent that they prepared for the long hard slog. Now, whether it's going according to plan or not, people want to dismiss this. I am not one to dismiss a deliberate approach to campaigning. We have to, particularly on the U.S. side, we have to remind ourselves that it took us 3 weeks to march up to Baghdad. He's been around Kiev since day 2. So I don't think it's the slow, ponderous thing that some people are making it out to be. Look, mass, time, and firepower are on his side. So those could be decisive in the long term. I don't know what the rush is. I really don't know what the rush is. People are saying,
well, I guess the rush, if I could fill in the blank, maybe the longer this goes on, the more casualties the Russian army takes. The more the ability to cover this up at home becomes more challenging, and the threat of unrest inside of Russia becomes I wouldn't minimize it, becomes greater. And that is always the biggest fear of the Kremlin, that Russians may rise up. In fact, it may be one of the reasons that they went into Ukraine in the first place, to stop the spread of democracy on their border.
Yeah, great theories, and I submit to both of those. As a matter of fact,
Forgive me for that. It's anybody can have their theories.
I think there's certainly basis in fact there, and we've seen that. So he has clamped down on the media and the internet. So that's a statement of fact. If any media source reports something other than what's officially released by the government, then they risk a 1 million ruble fine, whatever 1 million rubles is worth now, probably 15 cents or half a pound or something. I don't know. But you open the door to another thing that's developing here. This is the discussion about alliance with and a combined operation with Belarus. So the indicators are that Russia and Belarus are building towards an alliance that they will announce later this week, probably, or early next week. Belarus, Lukashenko has asked for S-400s getting beefed up in eastern Belarus, and he's asked for security guarantees and this, that, and the other, and all that is just paved the way for Russian forces to be there and to legitimize their basing out of Belarus for launching attacks into Ukraine. I have it on very good and reliable sources, not related to the U.S. government, that Belarus is in fact providing individual replacements in small groups to the Russians. They're not providing full trained units. They have a small army to begin with. It's like 20,000 people, but they're providing well-trained and good troops to the Russians in small numbers to escape, I would say, review and understanding from Western intelligence or Ukrainian intelligence. So you got that going on.
You think they're going in with Russian flags on their shoulders?
Yeah, I do. I think they're going in under Russian auspices. They're fighting as Russians. They're not fighting as Belarusians. And if this formal alliance comes about, allegedly there's an emergency meeting of the Duma to consider this. If this formal alliance comes through, you'll see martial law in Belarus and potentially Russia, and that will give Putin additional powers to clamp down on the public release of information or the infiltration of information from the war zone, on casualties, how bad it's going, anything that's negative to the party line there, so to speak. But that also raises the specter of Moldova. When we saw yesterday in open sources Lukashenko in front of his map, doing his briefing and pointing to the map that indicated that not only are they going for Transnistria, but they're going for Moldova. And if that's an information campaign on one side or the other, I don't know about that, but it certainly raises that possibility. I don't know what there is stopping Russia and Belarus from going for Moldova.
I got my calculator out this morning, and most people could do this in their head probably, but I just did it very quickly. And when I was looking up your 33 years and minus that from 2022, it takes us back to around 1989 when the former Soviet Union was starting to collapse.
Right.
You trained for an East-West conflict in those days, as did American tank commanders, and that's what it was all about. Now it's been, Iraq and Afghanistan and very, very different circumstances. I think we're going back now to an East-West conflict. Do you think that NATO should remilitarize all of those countries closer to Russia? Because I think we better take President Putin's comments about Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, that they shouldn't have been allowed to leave the Soviet Union. I mean, I'm not laughing. I am shuddering at some of his comments. And he has shown us he's serious about taking Ukraine. And you're right about Moldova, and he's interfering in Georgia. He's playing in the stands in terms of, I don't know what the IOU is on Kazakhstan, and nobody does. Do you think we better get serious about remilitarizing all of those eastern flank countries?
I think they're answering that for themselves. And yes, those countries, with the exception of Hungary, are taking a hard look at what they're doing and what their posture is. Estonia is not waiting for Putin to demonstrate, ill will towards them. They are in up to their elbows, reinforcing Ukrainian forces with all manner of military support. Lithuania is as well. They know that their future is very dependent on what happens in Ukraine. Indeed, the frontline nations, Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, in particular, are looking at this situation and they're like, oh, this is not good. If he gets away with this, we are in serious, serious trouble here.
What did you train the Ukrainian army to do? I mean, they were not contemplating this in 2016.
No, they weren't.
What was the overarching mission, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah.
Training to do what? To fight the Donbass, or to fight the line of contact, or what? I mean, what were you trying to do then, and where does that leave them now?
Sorry.
Pentagon calling, sir. You're being recalled.
Yeah, I wish it was the Pentagon, but it's not. Anyway,
what was the training mission? I mean, and what did that leave them able to do?
Yeah, so the U.S. Army established a joint military training group, Ukraine, out west of Lviv, in the training area out there. As Yariv is the training area, and they were training battalion task forces and in all the combined armed skills that they needed to be effective, not only in Donbass but for general defense purposes. Additionally, there was a very strong soft commitment from the NATO allies to get in there and train the 5 regiments of their special forces, previously Spetsnaz, and reform them into something that the NATO alliance would understand to be special operations. The difference being Spetsnaz being long-range reconnaissance troops as opposed to special forces or special operations forces having a direct action, special reconnaissance, and essentially a counterinsurgency mission through the military assistance. So, working through not only the tactics, I would say at the tactical level, they're very well trained. The Army units rotated through JMTGU were very well trained. That's been going for a number of years, 4 years, 5 years, maybe. That's been running, and they're very well trained. So the general plan has been general defense of Ukraine against Russian attack. Ukraine has always thought that Russia was going to attack in the larger sense. I think that was somewhat dismissed by the Western powers. These are the same powers that missed the indications and warning of invasion of Crimea and Donbass. So Ukrainians had it right. The so-called Western powers did not have it right in this case.
Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, also retired, but he's a friend. I mean, I knew him when he was a brigade commander, and then he became the head of U.S. Army Europe. He was speaking today, and as I see the lights really starting to dim on the Ukrainian army, just based on all of these sieges of cities, he in fact was very positive today, saying that European countries are rushing resupply to Ukraine. They are able to get them in, just not food and medicine. We're talking about, the javelins, the anti-tank weapons. He doesn't see maybe quite the forecast end to this that I might put on it. And that kind of led me to believe, well, they're still fighting. They may lose some cities, but they may also hold on, be able to reclaim some things. And long term, maybe we better not count them out here. So do you think that with resupply, they are able to continue to hold ground and that this is far from over?
Yes, unequivocally, yes. I strongly believe that. I've been watching the supply flows in there in the national commitments that the nations are making. Look, you're screwed and you're a bad guy when Switzerland comes out of the woodwork and says, we oppose you and we're going to sanction you. You know it's a bad day when Germany breaks their post-World War II tradition and starts supplying arms and ammunition to your opponent. You know you're screwed when Sweden ships 1,500 anti-tank missiles to your opponent. Germany sending 2,500 SA-7 Grail anti-aircraft missiles, man-fired, shoulder-fired, man-portable anti-aircraft missiles. And the pipeline is there. So it's just got to get to the right units in the right places. So on one hand, it's interesting and compelling that Russia has encircled these cities and is now laying siege to them. On the other hand, it goes from a maneuver warfare to positional warfare, and they are positionally fixing themselves around these cities. Assuming that there's going to be maneuver forces left in the Ukrainian army, and they get resupplied with all the javelins, the AT-4s, the in-laws from the Brits, et cetera, that's flowing in there. And by my count, in the range of, we're up to probably around 6,000 or 7,000 air defense weapons that have been shipped in there or are in the process of being shipped in. They will be positionally fixed around these cities, and they will be mercilessly attacked from the outside in by the remnants of the Ukrainian forces or the resistance or whoever. So they've been clever by half, perhaps, if they don't bring about a decision by laying siege to the cities. If Ukraine holds on and there's a remnant Ukrainian army that can be resupplied, rebuilt, it will have the advantage of maneuver while the Russians will have essentially fixed themselves in place, subject to being interdicted by the Ukrainians.
Major General Mike Repass, to quote you again, sir, and I'm going to steal the line, the dog that catches the car. That paints a picture, and I appreciate all your time today.
Yeah, thanks.
And that's our backstory on Ukraine and Putin's invasion. By the way, using the word invasion can get you 15 years in prison in Russia now for being an enemy of the state. Can you imagine how Russia is cutting off and cutting out international media? Reporters are leaving Moscow instead of trying to get the world to better understand its views. I was a TV reporter there for 12 years. It all makes journalists extremely sad to leave their posts. Putin's strategy seems to be lose a war, collapse the Russian economy, and strengthen NATO and international resolve against Russia, and get more countries to join NATO because they fear Russia. Putin is coming up on 70 years old this year. He was once considered an international strategic chess player. Now he's a gambler, holding a losing hand in Ukraine. Thanks for listening to Backstory. Share this podcast and subscribe to it. I'm Dana Lewis, and I'll talk to you again soon.